We're here to acknowledge and to recognize the contribution of Jason Lee to the settlement of the Northwest. And we are here just as they were on the Great Oregon Trail with sufficient amplification for anything we might say, just as they had. As we went from rest area to rest area with our wagon trains, in the year of 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led a military expedition called the Corps of Discovery from the United States to the mouth of the Columbia, where the river flows into the Pacific Ocean. After returning to report their findings to President Thomas Jefferson and the American media, there was a great surge of interest in the land and the people of the area of Oregon. By the 1830s, there were French, Canadian, and American trappers in the Oregon area, as well as the longtime resident Indian peoples. About this time, one of the tribes, the Flathead Indians, sent a delegation of 4 chiefs to St. Louis to request a copy of the white man's Book of Heaven. The chiefs met with William Clark, General William Clark, their longtime acquaintance with the Lewis and Clark expedition. The general took the chiefs into his home, as he could see they were sick and in poor health. He did his best to impart an understanding of the Christian view of the world. General Clark passed the Indian request along to the Methodist Episcopal Mission Committee. Reverend Jason Lee was chosen to fulfill the mission of bringing Christianity to the Indians. He was 31 years old and was described as a stalwart fellow, standing 6'3", weighing 200 pounds, and of an iron constitution, it is said. The intent of the mission committee, no doubt, was to bring the Book of Heaven and all that acceptance of Christ promises to the native peoples. On his way west, under the guidance of Captain Nathaniel Wyeth, Lee passed through Fort Hall in what was to become Idaho. While at the fort, Lee preached the first sermon in the Northwest on July 27th, 181 years ago. The specific contents of his remarks are not known, but he no doubt relayed his missionary intentions and admonished his listeners to be thankful for God's handiwork and their blessings. After the sermon, the activities of the day began, one of which was a horse race, in which one of the riders was killed. We don't know if the accident occurred because the rider had committed RUI, that is, riding under the influence, but we do know that Reverend Lee presided over the funeral. Lee and his party arrived in the Oregon country with a strong intention to Christianize the native peoples. A mission and a school were soon constructed near the town of Salem, what is now Salem. Unfortunately, Lee brought more than the Book of Heaven and his good intentions. It is unfortunate that the native peoples were not immune to the communicable diseases that the Europeans brought west. And many children at the mission became sick or died and returned to their parents. But Lee did not give up his quest. In 1837, he pleaded for and received the first reinforcements, which meant more preachers, their wives, and children. Among the new arrivals was Miss Anna Marie Pittman. 2 months later, Anna Marie and Jason Lee were married in a beautiful fir grove east of the mission. A second reinforcement arrived in 1838, and Lee left for the east with the hope of raising money, recruits, and delivering signed petitions urging the United States to annex Oregon. On his trip east, Lee was accompanied by 3 Indian boys who created a sensation while singing Methodist hymns at the churches in which Lee preached about his mission work. Lee also received the word from out west that his wife Anna Marie had died while giving birth to a son. Later, and while in New York, Lee met and married a recent graduate from seminary, Lucy Thompson. The Lees, along with 50 others comprising the Great Reinforcement, sailed for Oregon in late 1839. By 1842, most of the Indians had disappeared from the Willamette Valley, and those who were there avoided the mission for fear of disease. Jason Lee's failure to bring Christianity to the Indians was becoming evident. Some of his fellow ministers thought he was misusing the Methodist mission monies by devoting more time to the white settlers than his mission to the Native Americans. As the Indians began to be swept away, white settlers swarmed into the Willamette Valley. Lee is credited with making the Willamette Valley available 1,000-acre plot at a time. Lee's second wife, Lucy, died shortly after giving birth to Lucy Anna Marie. The Methodist Mission Board sent Reverend George Gary to replace Lee. Lee then sailed to New York to defend his decisions. Upon hearing his case, the board exonerated Lee of the charge of misappropriation of funds and reinstated his title as missionary to Oregon. However, Lee did not return to Oregon. He became ill and died in March of 1845, just 11 years after his first arriving at Oregon. Historians of Oregon give Lee much credit for the establishment of that state. He is said to have secured the Oregon country to the United States, settled the boundary between Oregon and Canada, created the pioneer interest in the migration west, and thus the populating of the Oregon country by Easterners, and for helping establish the economy and maritime trade. Indian historians might see their Oregon story differently. The Flathead chiefs sought the Book of Heaven, but it didn't work out as well for them as they might have hoped. Lee did not accomplish his specific mission of Christianizing the whole Indian population of the Northwest, but he did bring Christianity, and later, as we know, many native peoples have become Christians. He had a major part in that. We are here at Ross Park, July 12, 2015. We know about the hindsight of history. Jason Lee did not have hindsight, and perhaps no knowledge of what the Europeans might bring in terms of harm to the native peoples. His intention was to give the native peoples the greatest gift he had, that being his conviction of Christ. He spent his health and his family, including 2 wives and an infant son, to accomplish his goal. He had his failures, but he had his successes, and they are in those areas I just listed. Reverend Jason Lee's ashes were moved to Salem in 1906 and were reinterred next to his wives and infant son in the Jason Lee Cemetery. Today, a statue on the grounds of the Oregon State House in Salem proclaims Jason Lee as Oregon's greatest statesman. Thank you.